Hello and welcome! I'm Linz on Twitch. I am here to talk to you about World of Warcraft macros. So this is a requested video from someone who saw my weakauras, how to build weakauras video. They're hoping I do something similar for macros, and so that is what we're here today to do. So before I get into it, I do want to say that World of Warcraft macros are an extensive tool that you can do a tons of stuff with. And although I'm not a super power user of macros, I do use macros in my everyday and know enough about them to walk everybody through the basics, how to understand them, how they're built, how the more complicated ones work. And this should help you be able to build weakauras that are going to help your quality of life. You should be able to understand them when you see them in the wild, and you should have a better idea of what they're capable of. So if there is something that you want, it's probably already out there, and this will just help you figure out what to Google to get it. So that's basically the goal of this. It's not going to be everything you need to know to build the most complicated macros out there, because I'm pretty sure we could do an 8-week series on that, and I myself would have to learn quite a bit along the way. So we're definitely not going to do that. This is going to be a little bit more intro, beginner, intermediate type macro stuff. But you'll definitely understand macros better than you did before when you leave, I promise. Okay, so first, let's get into macros. I do want to say I threw this bar here just so we can test out our macros. I don't actually play with this giant bar in the middle of my screen, just for this video. Okay, so if you hit escape, or if you click on the question mark down in the corner here and go into macros, so this is built right into World of Warcraft. This is not an add-on or anything like that. This has been in World of Warcraft for as long as I can remember, if not forever. Basically, in the simplest form, macros allow you to create a button that you can press to do anything you could type into the commands. So let's create a new one here. We're going to call it for the horde. For the horde. Just find a horde looking symbol here really quick. What's looking good? This guy's yelling. He's good enough. Okay, so if we go /y for the horde exclamation point, and we save that, we just grab that icon here. So now when I hit Alt-1, it is going to /yell for the horde. So in the simplest form, that is basically what a macro is. Anything you can type down here, you can press and put on a button, and you can give that button a key bind and press it on the fly. So there's general macros and character specific macros. So we just created a general macro, which means that any character I have anywhere in World of Warcraft will be able to open the macro menu and see these general macros and be able to grab that for your horde macro. So if you're PvPing on lots of characters, you can access this on all your PvP characters. You definitely have to yell for the horde when you kill the alliance, for sure. And then there's character specific macros. So these are not spec specific, which means that they're not tied to just your healer or just your DPS. They are for the whole character. So anything you put in here, all your different specs can access. There is a limited amount of macros. This is basically all you can have for character specific, and there's just a little bit of a scroll bar here for general macros, so you can run out, and it's not recommended to put all your character specific ones in the general, because you definitely can run out, and I have done that. I recently cleaned everything out of here. Now that Dragonflight's coming, and a lot of actually the majority of my macros were talent macros, which is been completely reworked, and they no longer work. There is an alternative, which we will get into today, so don't worry. If you have macros that you want to switch based on your talents, we can do it. Okay, so before we get into character specific macros and macros that you're going to want to use for your rotation and your play, I do want to talk about some general macros that I think are just really useful. So really quickly, I have an empty one here. Basically what I use this for is I will slam it down in empty spots that I don't want the game to put abilities in. So Shift E is always my interrupt spot, and I don't have an interrupt talented on my healer, but when I change any talents, it likes to throw them onto my bars. I don't want it to land in that spot, so I can block it with an empty one. I also have like a general macro button. These are macros I'm pulling off of Wowhead. This is one to look for the lunar light buds as part of one of the Night Fae treasures in Ardenweald. So just use that. Okay, and then these two macros are like my favorite macros that exist. Basically what this is a Trinket 1 macro. What it says is use 13, which is item slot 13. Show tooltip 2 is whenever I hover over this, I actually get to see the tooltip of the trinket of whatever item is in slot 13. So 13 and 14 are my trinket slots. And what's really nice about this is if I switch my trinkets, this macro will just update. Like the image will update and the hover will update, and I have this actually down here on Ctrl Z. So when I hit Ctrl Z, I'm always hitting Trinket 1, and Ctrl X is always Trinket 2. So it's really nice for not having to constantly drag your trinkets onto your bars. I switch often between PvP and PvE, so I have my PvP trinkets on there, and I want to make sure they're getting swapped over to PvE so I can look down and see that my buttons are getting updated. Definitely don't want to show up with the wrong trinkets to either of those content. People get really mad. Okay, so those are trinket ones. I think they're just really useful. And you can use this use for any slot here. And instead of actually typing the slot number of 13, you can actually type the ability. So I can actually type in here Kabbalist Hymnal, and then this will be a trinket button macro for just that trinket. And if I switch the spot, it'll still look like that, like it's the original Kabbalist Hymnal, because we'll have typed it in there. So I don't recommend doing that. I think using use 13 and use 14 are better because they will always update with your items. Okay, so great macros. So other macros that you may want to use are things like, I have one here. I don't use LVUI anymore, but I had one to always open the LVUI settings. This is my engineering B-res, which I have on a bunch of characters. For the Horde, of course. I have one here for party keys, so I can just press this and it'll put into party chat /P exclamation keys, so we can look at everybody's keys for M+. I have one here for leave group. So I was using this when I was leveling a lot. You're going in and out of dungeon instances or scenarios, and you want to leave the instance at some point. Well, instead of always having to right click leave instance at the end of a dungeon, you can have a button that you can just press and leave instance. That's what I was using that for. I ended up stopped using it because I did it once or twice in a raid or a dungeon, and people were like, what, did you just rage quit? So I didn't mean to. I just accidentally pressed the wrong button. So be careful with this one. Make sure you don't put it somewhere you can accidentally press it in the middle of content, but it is nice when you're leveling, so you don't have to leave each dungeon by right clicking. And then I had one for Logout, which is nice. At the end of the night, I can just go leave group, log out, bye. So this is just to give you general ideas of the type of macros that are general macros that are out there that people use that aren't related to abilities at all. We're going to get into the abilities ones right now. Yeah, but some of these are really useful, especially these trinket ones. I love them. Okay, so let's talk about some ability ones. I think the most common and probably the most sought after one is Area Effect. So Efflorescence, this is a Resto Druid ability. It's an AoE heal. I press it, put it on the ground, and it puts a little heal down. So when I press this ability, I have this marker that I have to place, and then the ability goes down. And as you get better and better at this, it kind of feels like it's too much. Like I'm pressing I have to do 2 clicks here to get this ability out. Must be a better way. And the answer to that is oh, that's the wrong one. Focus cursor. Is to use an @cursor macro. So for this, I still have show tooltip because when I hover on it, I want to be able to see the efflorescence so I can check the numbers on it. And then it says cast, and then in square brackets @cursor, and then the ability Efflorescence. So you can type in Efflorescence, or you can open your spell book, find the ability. Did I miss it? Oh, I was in the wrong tab. Okay, so I can get ready to type here, and then if you hover over the ability and then shift left click, it'll actually paste it in. And you can do this for all of them, right? Anything in your spell book. So if you don't want to have to try to spell it out, you can always just click it right out of the spell book into the macro. So you get the spelling dead on. Okay, so this is saying @cursor cast Efflorescence. So we throw this on A5. So I put my cursor over here, A5. So it drops, the very center of it is exactly where my cursor was. So no matter where I put it, it's following my cursor. And I don't have that indicator that I have to place anymore. I'm able to just like know where I'm going to place it. And actually, you see I have a giant circle on my cursor. That is exactly what that's for. So I never lose track of it in the middle of all the chaos, and I'm able to cast those abilities. Okay, so let's say there's a situation where you want to be able to always cast it on yourself at player. So for instance, you may want to do this if you're in PvP and you're a shaman, you want to drop the capacitor helmet on yourself because there's like a melee on you and you want to drop it right here so you get stunned. Or if you're a Vengeance Demon Hunter and you want to drop Sigil of Flame like right underneath you and you don't want to have to worry about placing it, you can do that with an at player macro. So this is exactly the same as the one we were just looking at, our at cursor, except instead of cursor, it's at player. So if we grab this one, put on A6. So my cursor is out in the wild, and I press A6, or Alt-6, sorry, and it drops it right underneath me, dead center underneath me. So no matter where I'm going or where my cursor is, it'll always be right underneath me. So definitely some use cases. I don't know if Efflorescence is definitely the one, but definitely some use cases for that, for some other abilities. Okay, so another thing you can do is you can do at focus. Unfortunately, you can't do at target. I think that would be really cool because things like wild spirits and like any AoE on the floor abilities that you had to place, that were damage abilities, it'd be really nice to drop them on their target, but Blizzard has come out and said that they do not want people to have the ability to do that. You have to place it, that's part of the skill of the game. Doing it based on cursor or focus is fine, but not target. Okay, so focus. This is at focus. So if I actually click on myself and set as focus, now I have my little focus frame there. So my cursor's out in the wild. I even have an enemy selected on A7. It's going to drop it right under me because I am the focus. And I can actually set him to be the focus, and it should drop it. Oh, it won't let me do it on enemy. There you go. So what you could do, though, is you could set your tank as your focus and then be dropping the Efflorescence underneath the tank all the time if you don't want to have to place it. So definitely works for friendly. It doesn't look like it works at enemy at all. Which makes sense because they don't want the target to work, so if you're able to set your target as your focus and then do it anyways, that would be working around what they're trying to avoid us. So that focus will only work on friendly targets, which is fine for what we're using it for, right? Okay, so those are Efflorescence, the different things you can do with the place abilities. Let's talk about Mouseover, because that's the second most common in my opinion. So let's look at Rejuve. So for Rejuve, I have a show tooltip and then I have cast target. So I have Mouseover, exists, and nodead as my options on this. So that's saying that when I hover over something, that thing has to exist and not be dead. So you can't cast this on a dead body. And then this ability here, these like 2 extra square brackets, what those mean is that even if I'm not mouse over something, still cast Rejuvenation. Okay, so we put this here on A9. Let me show you what I mean. So I am targeting this enemy, but I can hover over myself and hit A9, and it'll cast the Rejuve on myself. Okay, and if I don't have a mouse over, so let's say I click myself. If I don't have those square brackets in, actually we can remove them for a second. I hit save. So when I press this, it doesn't do anything because I don't have a mouse over. And if I go to mouse over, it works. However, if you want to have it so that you don't have to be mouse over for the Rejuve, you just maybe sometimes want to click, sometimes want to mouse over, I can now that I have myself targeted, I can do it and it'll work. Or I can hover and it'll work. Can I do it on this guy? Yeah. No, he disappeared. Okay, so those little square brackets on the Mouseover for friendly spells are important to make sure the spell still works like the normal way, as well as with the Mouseover options. I do want to mention that if you're going to do this for a revive or a B-res or anything like that you're casting on dead, you want to change the options to Mouseover, help, and dead. So that means that this is a friendly, like I'm providing a helpful spell to them. That's what that is meaning. And dead means that they are dead. And so this revive still has those extra square brackets to make sure it works normally if you just want to click on it and press it as well. So just a key note to make sure that help and dead, or if it's friendly, it should be exists and not dead. So let's make some room here. All right, so now we're getting into a little bit more complicated stuff. The Mouseovers and the cursor casting, I think, are some of the most useful and common macros out there. They just make your gameplay a little quicker. With the Mouseover macro, it actually works a little bit better than the built-in Mouseover function that Blizzard has added. The main difference between them is that the Mouseover macro will work if you just hover your mouse over a friendly out in the world. So if you see someone running by and you just want to heal them, you can just mouse over and press the button. Whereas the Mouseover in-game doesn't work like that. You actually would have to click them and then target their frame, hover over their frame, or have them in your party and mouse over a frame somewhere for the Mouseover in-game. Whereas the Mouseover macro will work on absolutely anything you're hovered on. So that's the main difference there. So it does work a little bit better and it's a little bit easier. Plus it still has that main functionality with those extra brackets. So you do have that ability to have them or not. If you wanted to only work when a mouse over, then you can remove them. Which leads us into the next one, which is a button that does both. So let's say we wanted to rejuve on a friendly, but Moonfire on an enemy. So I have built one here that says target Mouseover exists nodead rejuve. Notice that I don't have those extra square brackets because I don't want this to do that if I'm not Mouseover. If I don't have a Mouseover target, I don't want to cast rejuve. So I've removed the extra square brackets. And then I have semicolon Moonfire, which means that if this Mouseover doesn't exist, just cast Moonfire. So I grab this and throw this in my bars. So what this allows me to do is I can have a target selected, an enemy target, and I can hover over my frame and hit Alt-2, and it put a rejuve on me. And then when I am no longer hovering, I can hit Alt-2, and it's going to put the Moonfire on the enemy. So that allows me to have one button that does two abilities based on if I'm moused over something or if I'm not. All right, let's look at modifiers. So I have a forms with mod. So this is one button that will put me into any form I want. And how this works, I actually don't have the show tooltip on this one. We always use show tooltip. Show tooltip. Okay, so this form with mods button that I've created will cast... Oh, I need to put it on a different button. I'm actually moving this down to 0, so it makes more sense. So it's going to be on my 0. Okay, so if I hold shift, it'll go to bear form. If I hold control, it'll go cat form. If I hold alt, it'll go treant form. And if I don't hit anything, it'll go to travel form. Just a quick note about modifiers too. If you ever find that the button modifier isn't working, it's likely because you have that already bound. So for instance, I have a button for Alt-0 already bound on my bars. So when I use that modifier and press Alt, it actually doesn't work. But if I go in to my keybinds and remove that Alt-0, then I can use this modifier macro, no problem. Next, I want to show you the cast sequence. Okay, so for this button here, I have this just switching between bear form and Treant Form. And this is something I use in PvP. Treant Form, you can't be polyed, and I can heal in this form. And then if I need to go and get some more defensives, try to want to run away or stay alive, I just go between bear. And because this will always go one and then the other, I can just keep pressing this to switch between forms for whatever I need to do. And you can do this for any forms, right? Like you could do this from booming into cat or bear into cat. This was really good when you were running affinity spells in prior to the new talent reworks. You could always have this go into your affinity. Okay, so that's cast sequence. So you can enhance cast sequence and you can actually have it do all kinds of like keep the sequence going, right? So for this cast sequence here, I have reset equals combat. And what that means is that this will reset back to the top of the sequence whenever I leave combat. So whenever I leave combat, my sequence is going to start with bear form, treant form, and then cat form. So let's try it. So it goes bear form, treant form, cat form, and it's going to go back to bear. But let's say we left it at tree, and then we went out of combat. I think you have to be in combat for that to actually trigger, but going in and out of combat would restart this. Okay. So that is cast sequence, and these reset things you can do. Reset if 25 seconds happens. There's all kinds of different triggers. You can definitely like look into cast sequences and when to reset them, and you can put a whole bunch of abilities in a row here. There was actually a time in beta where the boomkins were so broken that people were able to write a macro that had them switch between all the forms and then cast all of their spenders, and switching between forms and doing things like that would generate enough resource that they could just do spenders, and then all you're doing is switching between forms and casting spenders, and they did that with cast sequences, so you spend the whole dungeon doing that and you end up doing the most damage. It was a little silly, but that was all done with the cast sequence if you had ever seen a video of somebody doing something like that. Okay, so that's cast sequence. These could go on forever. They have so many options and so many cool things people can do them. I've heard of people getting their whole rotations into a cast sequence, but we're not going to go down that road. Most common is to just switch between two things. So if you had two abilities, you're always going to do one after the other. This is just a nice simple way to do that cast sequence. I always go to bear form to treant, bear form to treant. So I have one button to just switch, and I don't have to worry about having them in two buttons. Okay, so we talked about duel, we talked about cast sequences. Oh, this is really, really important. This is another super common one. Macroing trinkets into abilities. So you've probably heard people say that. I want to macro trinket into my ability. So here is one where I have Convoke the Spirits, and right before I Convoke the Spirits, I pop the Incrucible Quantum Device, which is a trinket that does question mark, question mark, question mark. Yeah, usually it gives you your best stat or your second best stat in a large amount, or if you're in Lust, it'll always give you your best stat. If your healer's low, it'll heal them. If there's somebody who doesn't have enough mana, it'll give them mana. It does all kinds of weird stuff. But assuming you can hit it in Lust, you'll get the right stats. You definitely want to do that before you do something big like Convoke the Spirits. Okay, so this is show tooltip for Convoke the Spirits, because I don't really need to know that there's a trinket hidden in there. And then use the name of the trinket and then cast the ability. So it's really important you have the right action in front of these, because you can't cast a trinket or use an ability. It has to be used on an item and cast on an ability. Something else that's really important here is you cannot do this for abilities that are both on the GCD. So when we were switching between our Bear and Treant Form, both those abilities are on the GCD, and see how our GCD is going around every time we do it. So we have to do this with a cast sequence. We couldn't do cast Bear Form, cast Treant Form, because it would only ever do the first one, and the GCD would kind of block anything else from happening. So this trinket macro only works like this, where you can press this one button and it'll pop the trinket and start casting the ability at exactly the same time. And that is only because trinkets are not on the GCD and you can press them at any time. And so that is why this is able to work. But really, really useful one. Make sure you use the name of the trinket and then you cast the name of the ability. And then your show tooltip, of course, with whatever you want to show. If you leave show tooltip blank, this may show you the trinket, yes, instead of the convoke. So you want to make sure you type in what you want the tooltip and everything to be. Yeah. Okay, what else do we have in here that we want to talk about? We got that one. I think it's time for the talent one. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how we are going to do macros based on talents. So previously you could just specify the row and column of the talent grid that we used to have and say, if I have this talent selected, this macro will be this button. If I have this talent selected, it'll be this button. So you can get a lot jammed into one button, and you don't have to keep dragging things onto your bar if you switch your talents around. Well, since the talents have been reworked, it doesn't work like that. We need an alternative, and World of Warcraft and Blizzard realizes this and gave us a command called known. It allows you to say, if an ability is known, and you do this for talents or for passives as well, like any of the talents. So if this is known, then use this ability. And so I've done a little wiggle right here, or sorry, a little macro right here that says, if I know Convoke the Spirits, I want this to be Convoke the Spirits. If I know Incarnation Tree of Life, I want this to be Incarnation Tree of Life. And if I don't know either of those, just make it Wild Growth. So if I press it, I just end up doing like an AoE heal. So, so I drag this onto my bar here. I had two convokes, confuse me. Okay, so this is my known macro, and it's currently showing as Convoke the Spirits. And if I switch my talent to Tree of Life, when my talent is done changing here, this will change to Tree of Life button. And if I were to go in here and pop these off, so I no longer know them, either of them, this will now be Wild Growth. Okay, so this is saying if I know an ability, then that's what then I can have whatever. And so you could do this where if I know this one talent, I want the ability to be this because it is going to be my number one priority. And if I know this other talent, then it'll be this instead. So you could have like your main offensive spell potentially on one button and just have a macro here that changes based on what your talents are so that your muscle memory can stay the same for how you play, but the ability will change and you don't need to constantly drag it onto your bars. So very nice for making talents that need to switch for based on talents. A really good example of this one actually is on Demon Hunter. They have an ability called Demon Bites, which actually makes their main filler ability become a passive. And so I've written a macro for my Demon Hunter that says if I have that ability chosen, I actually want this button to be Throw Glaive, so that if I ever press it, I still do damage. And as part of the rotation, it is recommended to use Throw Glaive a little bit more, because if your Demon Bite procs aren't there, you need some kind of filler, so your Throw Glaive becomes your new filler. And so I was able to take what is normally my filler that is in 90% of the builds, and then switch it to a totally different ability if I take this one specific build. Such as an example of where I use something like this, where I want to check if I know a talent so I can switch out a button. But another common use is just for those choice nodes, and if you don't have them chosen, to throw in another ability there so you don't accidentally press them and nothing happens. So something like that. Okay, so to wrap it all up, we have at cursor, which lets you cast abilities at wherever your cursor is. We have at player, which lets you cast them wherever your player is. We can have one where you can cast it wherever your focus is. We have Mouseover abilities that let us cast over if we're mousing over, or if we're not mousing over and we have someone selected. We have dual abilities, which will do two different things based on if you're moused over or have a target. So that's our dual here. So if I'm moused over, A2 is going to heal me. And if I'm not moused over, A2 is going to put Moonfire on the enemy. We have cast sequence abilities that let us rotate between abilities. We have more complicated cast sequence abilities, which will reset when we go in and out of combat. We have yell macros, and we have known macros, which we can change what ability this is based on talents, known or not known. So if you wanted to do where if I don't know Convoke the Spirits, instead of saying I know the Convoke Spirits, the command is just no known instead of known. I'm not sure why they didn't do unknown. What a missed opportunity, eh? Okay, so there you go. That is kind of the basics and some common macros that you may find yourself wanting to use. Hopefully, knowing about all of these and seeing the different use cases for some of these macros gives you an idea for some macros of your own, and you can most certainly use this knowledge to scour the internet to see if you can find exactly what you're looking for, if somebody's already perfected it in a macro. And if you want to do crazy things like put your whole rotation in there, it's definitely possible. You just have to do a little research on your end. But lots of cool stuff to do with macros, and I definitely hope this helped. So I will put all of these macros that I've used in today into the description of this YouTube video, so you can grab them and edit them with your own abilities. Thank you so much for checking this out. Like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot if you did enjoy this and you find it useful. And if there's something you really want to know about in World of Warcraft that you don't quite understand, haven't found a good video on it, you let me know and I will do my best to make it. I love doing these educational videos and it's hard to know what to do it on, so definitely open to suggestions. All right, thank you so much.